Put on your full Crusader set with the new Metatron Crusader t-shirt, available through Teespring. Link in the description below. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel and Aue Caesar. So today we're going to discuss this concept of swords on the back from a Roman perspective, which is I think what I can bring to the table. Okay, so first off, as we look at Roman iconography, well, the first thing we see is that there is no evidence whatsoever to support the idea that any Roman, in any period of time, whether it be Republic, Regnum or Imperium, would wear the sword on the back, whether it be a centurion, whether it be a gladiator, whether it be a Roman legionary. So the thing is, when we consider the speculative idea of would it make sense for a Roman soldier to wear the sword on the back, well, the first thing we need to consider is the fact that it's always sword on the back as opposed to sword on the hips. This is my main weapon, the gladius. Why would I choose to wear it on the back as opposed to wear it on the hips? That's the question, that's the first focus. So today we're going to experiment a little bit. We're going to try a few things: walking, climbing, both wearing the sword on the right hip like it's standard Roman, and then wearing the sword on the back. So without further ado, let's get to it. Why on the right and not on the left? Well, here's the thing. Some Romans did wear the sword on the left, and those were for example, the centurions, the officers, even emperors. And the reason is it's possibly a status symbol, is something that shows your status. But also you have to consider that Roman legionaries and even equites, so cavalry or praetorians, they would all wear the sword on the right. Why? Because they were carrying very large shields, and with a very large shield such as the scutum, you can't draw the sword if it's on the left without moving the scutum out of the way. And that is problematic, because if you are on the battlefield or if you're being ambushed, then arrows, darts might be coming your way, and you don't want enemy missile to hit you, because of course, yes, you have got armor, but you never know, your throat could be it's still exposed, your arms are exposed. You want to have your shield in front of you, and if you are already in a formation for combat, again, the sword on the right allows you to move, to draw it without having to move the shield out of the way. And I think that is the reason why in Roman times that was the norm. As we progress in the Middle Ages, then shields get smaller, and that's not really too much of a problem anymore. But in Roman combat, and considering the Roman philosophy of war, it makes absolute sense to wear the sword on the right. So I think that since there were some Celtic tribes that wore the sword on the back, ultimately, if a Roman were to wear the sword on the back, I think it would look very barbaric. And so it would make sense to think that it would be frowned upon. Also, the length of the blade. Is it possible to draw a gladius from the back? Well, we could see clearly that you can, and the reason is that the gladius is definitely shorter than medieval swords. But I'd like to underline it's shorter. But considering the gladius a short sword, I never really agree with that, because I mean, look at this beast. It's exactly the length of my frigging arm from the shoulder to the tip of my middle finger. to me, that's not a short blade. It's a shorter blade if compared to later swords. Anyways, this length, it's actually easy to draw. You don't need to make any modifications to the scabbard of the gladius. The only problem that I noticed is the fact that when you draw the sword, you are forced to raise your elbow and therefore to open your armpit. Now, this is something that the Romans were taught not to do. Why? Because the armpit is a weak spot for every armor. So not just Roman armor, of course there is no protection here, but also medieval armor. Sometimes you have mail, but there are some very pointy swords in medieval times, late medieval times, that could penetrate mail, particularly with half swording. So in general, in all sorts of armor, whether you were talking about ancient Greek armor all the way up to late medieval armor, this is always a weak spot. There are only a bunch of exceptions that actually managed to cover this in like Renaissance times, but in the majority of cases, I'm going to say that one of the reasons why I don't advocate, I don't suggest, I don't think it's very effective to wear the sword on the back is because you are forced to reveal a direct route to the heart and possibly one of the only weak spots of your armor. Now clearly in Roman armor you've got more weak spots, but still, if you draw in the normal way, as you can see, my armpit is closed, and therefore even if you attack, well, here I'm going to have the shield, but even if I don't have the shield, I've got my shoulder plates protecting me. So I very strongly support the idea of wearing the sword on the hips. As you walk with the sword on the back, one of the problems is that it's harder to be ready to draw, because it's not natural to walk with your hand on the hilt, and depending on the situations, those few seconds that you might need to reach the sword to draw it might mean the difference between life and death. So when you are inside, for example inside a home or something like this, it could make sense to wear the sword on the back, but again, I would still think that it's better to wear it on the hips and just being careful, because again, if you are attacked, I believe it's better to have the sword ready, because again, walking like this, it's a bit strange, it's very uncomfortable. Walking like this instead, it can be natural, even if the sword is on the left. So I think wearing the sword on the back would be even better if you were climbing. Now, would a Roman soldier climb a wall? Possibly not, but if it did happen, it could make sense to wear the sword on the back, because then, you know, both your hands are free, the sword is not hitting stuff, it's not going to get stuck inside of one of the rungs of your ladder, for example. So there are some possible advantages, but I can see wearing the sword on the back making sense only in very few specific situations. In all other cases, I'm going to say wear the sword on the right. So what Romans normally do is we see Romans wearing their gear in two different ways, either when they're in enemy territory or ready to fight, and when they are on the march, and the same gear will be worn in a different way. Now when you are in enemy territory like this and securely tied under the chin, and then the shield is carried on the left because you need to be ready. If an enemy ambushes you, if they attack, you need to be ready to unsheath your sword and be ready for combat, to, you know, form the normal formation, combat ready formations. But when you are on the march, particularly in friendly territory, or in general when you're on the march and your scouts are already having a look at the enemy, and you know there is no one nearby, then the shield will be inside a waterproofed leather cover, and it will be on your back, and the helmet will be carried on the bosom. And this helps a lot, particularly when it's very hot. It helps getting some fresh air, and the helmet is not a burden on you in that case. It's sitting you know, on top of your cuirass, on your pectoral plates. And the shield, of course, is not just on one side. You don't have to carry it with one, you know, because you do have the briefcase grip with Roman shields, and you don't have to carry it with your left arm. It's on your back and it's easier to carry. Now, of course, in that case, you're not ready to fight, so of course the Romans had to choose. Now, if you are on the march wearing also the sword on the back, I think it would be problematic because the shield is already there. And when you are ready to fight, we noticed as we were filming the first parts that it is slightly harder to be ready to draw your sword when it's on the back. So I think that when you're in enemy territory, it makes a lot more sense to wear the sword on the hips as a Roman. So would it make sense for gladiators to wear the swords on the back? Well, I think that considering the fact that a gladiator is basically someone who's creating and providing a show, entertainment, given a little violent, but it's still entertainment for the ancient Romans, that one thing we need to remember is that gladiators don't really need to carry their weapons. In fact, they didn't. Most likely, weapons were given to them as they were entering the arena. So it wouldn't really make sense to wear the sword on the back even for a gladiator unless he really wanted to do it just for show, because he's not really carrying it anywhere. The sword is given to him, so he doesn't need a scabbard, he doesn't need a sheath, he doesn't need anywhere to put his sword back. All he's doing is wielding the weapon. So as he enters the arena, his weapon is already in his hand, he needs to use it, and when it's done, he goes back to wherever he came from, they close the gates, and he gives the swords back to the legionaries, or the guards. A gladiator doesn't wear his weapons. So even for a gladiator, unless we consider pure entertainment, it wouldn't really make sense to wear the sword on the back, because again, for a gladiator, you don't wear your weapon. Alright, number ones, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember thumbs up, and if you're not a member of my community, if you're not a noble one yet, subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron. If you haven't, check out Shy Diversity channel video on swords on the back, also Scalagrim's video on swords on the back. In fact, in the sword community there are a lot of YouTubers who deal and tackle these topics. Check them out, highly suggested. And then remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.